Welcome to the Mets Pod. On today's show, we talk the latest on Carlos Correa and when his contract could be solved, as well as the Mets' future moves beyond that. Later on, we review the Mets farm system, including scouting reports and potential timelines for the team's best prospects. As always, we close out the show answering your mailbag questions. So a reminder to subscribe to the Mets Pod on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your shows. What's up, everybody? Welcome to another episode of the Mets Pod. We are back from the holiday hiatus. I'm your host, Connor Rogers, joined as always by my co-host, Joe DeMayo, and we wait for some Carlos Correa news. Joe, I got so bored waiting. I am in Las Vegas. If I look a little different, everybody, that is why. So I'm having a good time here. But Joe, a happy new year to our audience and everybody. How are you doing, man? It's time to bring you in.
Doing great. I was wondering when you joined the Zoom if you're going to be hanging from a chandelier or what exactly was going to be going on here. But no, definitely excited to be back after the break. So like you said, Happy New Year, everybody. And I certainly didn't think 2 weeks ago when we were recording our Carlos Correa emergency episode that we'd come back and we still wouldn't actually have Carlos Correa as a New York Met.
Nothing official yet. I will say the optimistic side for all Mets fans is that it sounds like this, and it has been this way through the holidays up until us recording at this very moment. This has been an ongoing process between the New York Mets and, of course, Scott Boras and Carlos Correa. It hasn't turned into a situation like we saw on the other end of things where it didn't work out with the Giants. 12 hours went by of what sounds like radio silence. The Mets swooped in and got something done. So barring a situation like that popping up again, which doesn't seem likely at the moment, the Mets continue to work on finding middle ground with this contract situation with Correa. And Joe, we've heard all kinds of different things, right? We've heard from Ken Rosenthal that this ultimately will look a lot different from the original deal that was negotiated of 12 years, over $300 million. Now, Joe, I guess my question is, and it's tough to answer this because it can go so many different ways, but let's lay out the scenarios. In your gut feeling, do you think this is an insurance situation, a ripping up the deal and taking down the term, but raising the AAV? What do you think is the compromise in such a, let's call it what it is, a pretty unique situation between the Mets and a mega free agent signing?
I think they may have some complications with the insurance because these are pre-existing things with Correa, so they may have a trouble getting the contract insured the way they'd want to without paying some massive premium. It's speculation, obviously, but I think you're looking at, like, if you turn on MLB Network or turn on SNY for a better reference, the bottom line might still say Mets and Carlos Correa agreed to 12 years, $315 million. But with this, the whole contract is going to be within the details. Obviously, we can go back to JD Martinez, which is an example that Scott Boras had done previously. He signed, I think it was 5 years, $115 million with the Red Sox. They had an issue with his foot. And if something were to arise where he missed a certain amount of days in years 2 and 3, then the last 2 years would become mutual options. And then they also threw in an opt-out for JD Martinez. None of those things came to fruition. His foot was fine. He didn't opt out. He got the full 5-year, 115. I don't think Steve Cohen and the Mets are against Carlos Correa getting 12 years and $315 million from them, as long as he's healthy, that ankle holds up. I'm sure the back is a part of it. He's had a history of some back issues. I expect you'll see something where it's, heavily based on games played or time missed at a certain point in the contract. And then maybe the contract could either be voided to a degree, or maybe it's more of the following years become options. But I truly believe this deal will get done. You mentioned the Giants. It was a quick pivot for Scott Boras, and he wasn't quiet about anything. Like, he came right out, said Carlos was fine. 12 hours later, there's a deal with the Mets. This has been 2 weeks of radio silence. So I just think it's a lot of lawyers. It's a lot of doctors. It's a lot of working out a contract that at the end of the day, if it gets completed, I expect it might be one of the most convoluted looking contracts we've ever seen.
Yeah, I'm with you. And I think another positive side of it is it's pretty telling that there haven't really been a lot of leaks at all, quite frankly, which tells you that both sides are working in unison, working together. There's not so far, and I know it's taken a while. I do think the holidays played into that a little bit as well, especially, with the lack of business days available in baseball for the Mets and the Correa side to work with. I think it's telling that there hasn't been a leak war of it's actually not a big deal. The Mets are trying to save money or trying to save themselves on the back end. It's just nothing like that has come up. It's just the reality is with this deal with Correa, I think everybody knows Correa should be a super impactful player for, I would say, the better part of the next half decade at a minimum with his age and what he has been for the last couple of years so far. The biggest thing is the end of this deal, which is always injuries or no injuries, when you're signing a guy into the wrong side of 35 years old and closer to his age 40 season, that's always the fear, Joe. And then when there's a legitimate medical reason, not just a, hey, this guy could break down, but a, hey, this guy has medical reasons telling you that I don't want to say a likelihood, but a higher chance than the average player that didn't have a surgery history like that. That's where it becomes really complicated. So the Mets have to do what's best for them. Correa has to go out and get every single last dollar and year that he possibly can because, Joe, as we know, this is a guy who's been through this before. I mean, he went through it. He took the contract with the Twins that gave him insurance to have the opportunity to reach free agency in his prime again if he had a good year. He did. He reached free agency. But now it feels like for Carlos Correa, and a lot of guys do want to settle in somewhere, it's time to settle in, get that long-term deal, figure out where you're going to be for a long time. And all signs point to that still being the New York Mets.
For sure. It's definitely pointing in the direction of the Mets. But one thing, you certainly want to be wary of, like you said, these long-term deals, let's call it what it is, almost every single one of them doesn't work out at the end of it, at the back end of the deal. You expect that. But if these medicals are saying, I don't want to speculate on timeline, but what if it's saying, halfway through you could have a problem. And if that's the case, maybe Steve Cohen's willing to eat a couple years like he did with Robinson Cano, but I don't think he's going to be willing to eat, $150 million. Yeah. And half a decade. So it's a different conversation. But like you said, I think both sides know that they are the best match for each other at this point. Like, I think Correa and his camp know this is probably his last shot to get that long-term deal if he's signing one this offseason. Because if he goes out into a third foray into free agency with two teams, I don't want to say failing his physical, but not signing him due to the physical, it's hard to envision another team saying, oh, well, we got 10 years and $300 million available to you. And then on the Mets side, Steve Cohen's public comments are something, saying that, they wanted to make a move that's going to put them over the top. And this is that. And, there's not a pivot for them too. So if the deal falls apart, it's not like the Mets have something else to turn to that's going to make the same kind of impact. They'd kind of be rolling out the team that you and I, before the Correa thing said, it's a great team. It's somewhat repetitive on the offensive side, but they won 101 games. They'd still be a contender. But Correa obviously is a potential difference maker. And I think both sides are motivated to get something done. And, hopefully we're not doing this too much longer.
Yeah, it feels like the Correa deal took us from, hey, we think this team is going to be really good. We think this team can win over 100 games again. They need to find a different switch when they get to the postseason. And maybe the trade deadline helps that. Maybe guys just perform much better in the postseason, the new staff, whatever you want to say. Then they signed Carlos Correa, and it was this team should expect, which is an insane thing to say, but the expectations are make it to the World Series and potentially win the World Series. And we're at the point of free agency where there is no pivot, right? Like everybody, the big bats signed. You don't want to, and the Mets, I just personally think, and I know you've been on this for a while, Joe, they're not a team looking to resort to a trade that cost them their farm system. Especially for most of the guys you trade for anyway that are stars, you're going to have to pay in a year or two anyway. So you'd rather wait it out in free agency. That's been the model under Cohen's ownership is go sign free agents, and not just any free agents, mostly sign free agents that don't cost you draft capital and don't cost you international signing money, so we can retain the farm system that, by the way, in just a moment, we are going to get into because Joe has been doing, as always, a ton of work on these guys. And it's a really good time of year to kind of visit that work, update it. We get so excited by the pro team that you forget, hey, there's a lot of promising names that have been accumulated in this farm system for the last couple of years by the Mets, obviously scouting community. So moving aside from Correa for just a second, I mean, I think the Mets are close to done. That's the big one. There maybe could be a question of a bench bat or a defensive player on the bench, maybe a really low cost bullpen kind of arm. I mean, this is a team right now that they got Diaz, they got Robertson, they got Ottavino back. Like there's depth in the starting rotation. But Joe, when the Correa situation, however it gets solved one way or the other, when that does wrap up, what is maybe the one move that you have your eyes on for the Mets, especially after they already traded James McCann, which is something we seem to discuss week in and week out?
Yeah, they finally did make the move with James McCann. For those that may have missed it, the Mets actually ate 19 of the $24 million owed to him to send him to Baltimore for a player to be named later. And I actually think the Correa move does impact what they do going forward, because if Correa does end up with the Mets, I think it's possible that Eduardo Escobar is traded. And if Correa is not a Met, then I think that goes out the window. And there are some teams looking for some offense at third base. I saw the writer for The Athletic for the Tigers, I forget his name, mentioned Escobar as an option for the Tigers, who are looking for a third baseman. So if let's play a hypothetical world that Correa is a Met, you could potentially trade an Escobar to the Tigers. Maybe you're getting a Gregory Soto, who was their closer, and really sprucing up that bullpen. We talked about Liam Hendricks. Is that something you could circle back to? But I think trades definitely are things to keep an eye on. Escobar, Carlos Carrasco. And then as far as just outside of that, a fourth outfielder that could play center field, I think would be great. Even if the offense isn't quite as much, though, I'd love to see them bring in an Adam Duvall. And, obviously if you're going to move Escobar, who I think you and I looked at when we first talked about Correa as this is going to be the right-handed part of the DH platoon with Vogelback.
Yes, I'm still there.
And I'm fine with that as well. But I think at this point, if they sign Correa and that's a done deal, they can be opportunistic with Escobar. And, if you tell me what's going to bring more value to the Mets in 2023, Eduardo Escobar as half of a DH and occasionally play in the field and be, there in the case of injury, or, maybe a Gregory Soto, who was an all-star closer for the Tigers, is what's more valuable. I don't know the answer to that, certainly, but it's something that I think the Mets can weigh. And, one more bench fourth outfielder would fit, one more reliever. But I would keep an eye on the trade market with Escobar and Carrasco.
That's a really good point. You might be able to get, we looked at so long as, Carrasco or Escobar or Canna is like ways to manipulate the salary, when we thought this team's salary would be under $300 million at the time. And now I think we look at those pieces and go, well, how can you, instead of manipulate the salary, but also really figure out the roster? And like you said, Joe, it's getting stronger in areas that you think you need a little boost. Maybe it is that fourth outfielder. Maybe you're trying to build a Super Bowl pen, which I think would make everybody really, really happy with this team. Well, I said it's nice to have those three guys at the top. Wouldn't hurt to have another high leverage arm. So I think the Mets, while it doesn't seem like they have a ton ahead of them, there still seems to be that one low profile, not a high cost financially kind of move, but maybe one that has a ceiling that could make a difference on this team with an injury here or an injury there. So let's get into the farm system, because Joe, you've wrote a ton of features on this farm system on SNY.TV. All your written work is there, where it's, you can really go in depth on scouting these guys, what to expect from them. But I think it's a good time for our show, because we try to be well balanced with the entire organization. We love talking about the professional team, free agency. There's no more exciting time, I think, in Mets land, but a huge initiative, part of this ownership, is rebuilding the farm system so that the time comes at some point in the next 3 to 5 years, the Mets don't have to go out and give $50 million to a player here or $100 million to a player there to patch a hole for 2 to 3 years, but rather have young, affordable, cost-effective talent with a ton of upside come up, as we've seen the Dodgers do that turnover. Obviously, the Braves are in a different situation, but the Braves are absolutely a team that leans on young talent from the minor leagues to come up and make significant contributions to the club. So let's start with the Mets' most recent high-profile draft pick, and that's Kevin Parada, somebody that I remember leading up to the draft, Joe. I don't think we fully expected him to make it to the Mets. I think in most mock drafts, he was going a couple picks ahead of them, a high-profile bat out of college, a catcher, but I will leave that part to you if you think he's a long-term catcher. But where's your stance right now on Parada, who for a while we looked at and go, this could be the biggest trade chip the Mets have, or this could be at some point the best bat in their entire farm system once Alvarez graduates?
Parada was the Mets. They took him with the 11th overall pick, the compensatory pick they got for not signing Kumar Rocker the year before. And when I was going through my pre-draft stuff and I was doing my mock drafts over at SNY.TV and talking to people in the game, it was kind of consensus that Kevin Parada was going top 5. And people are like, maybe he'll fall like a spot or 2 out. And, he fell a few. And why that happened, I think it's probably a mix of things. One, he was a draft eligible sophomore, which gives you more leverage when you're negotiating a signing bonus. So you don't necessarily have to take under slot at a certain spot if you don't want to, because you have 2 more years of school remaining. Whereas if you're a junior, you have 1 more year. And then as a senior, you basically have no leverage. It's either take what we give you or don't play pro baseball. So he had that kind of leverage. And then on the defensive side, like you mentioned, he does need some work. He's a pretty average to slightly above average receiver. The arm needs some work. I mean, he only threw out 12% of runners this year at Georgia Tech. So I don't think throwing is going to be a huge part of his game. But he's a good athlete back there. He's certainly a leader and someone that really knows how to lead a pitching staff. But what you're really buying is the bat. And, maybe long-term it's a different position. I have even heard shortly after the draft that don't be surprised if he's capable of playing left field. Like, that's the type of athlete that he is. But the bat is what you're buying. It's plus bat to ball skills. It's well above average power. It's good pitch recognition skills. Like you said, once the likes of Alvarez and Baty graduate, he could be, the top hitting prospect in the system. And I even wrote in my piece that you could read at SNY.TV. It won't shock me that if we're having this conversation a year from now, and Kevin Parada is considered the best catching prospect in all of baseball.
That's an overwhelming amount of talent at a unique position for the Mets. Obviously, having Alvarez there and now having Parada, a lot of value. I'm really excited to keep an eye on what he does in the minor league system, because he does, from everything you've said for a long time, going back to when he was in college and not in the Mets system, the general thought was like, this guy is going to hit at the next level. It's just a matter of what kind of, where's the power tapped out at and what level. But as a pure hitter, there's a lot of excitement there. And that hasn't always been the case in the Mets system. It feels like Alonso was a slugger, and Alonso came up with a giant bang, and that was a pretty rare situation. But in terms of overall offense, we've seen guys come up and either struggle or they were more known for their defense in the system. And with that, I kind of want to move over, though, to somebody that we've had high expectations for in the pitching side of things for a while. And unfortunately, due to health, it just hasn't worked out for Matt Allan. And it's been a long road for Matt Allan. This was somebody that, fascinating draft situation where they were able to manipulate the salary situation. They drafted him in the 3rd round, right, Joe? Mm-hmm. And with moving around the bonus pool, they were able to sign him for somebody that was, projected as a 1st-round caliber player out of high school. So, Joe, just kind of a reminder to the audience, what has gone on with Allan injury-wise over the last couple of years, and what his timeline is this year to get back into being hopefully a top-flight arm for the Mets organization.
Yeah, if you go back to the 2019 draft, they drafted Matt Allan in the 3rd round, and he was considered the top high school pitching prospect in the country. And when I did my big board for the 2019 draft, I actually had Allan ranked 2 spots ahead of Brett Baty, who the Mets eventually took with their 1st-round pick. And the word was that Allan had a big signing bonus demand of over $4 million, kept falling. And there was a point at the end of the first round that Jeff Passan tweeted the Cubs are taking Matt Allan with this pick. And then they didn't. So he kept falling, and people are just like, all right, he'll end up at the University of Florida. We see this every single year. But the Mets had some insight. Their area scout at the time, John Updike, had a relationship with Matt Allan and his family. And he told the Mets, I think he wants to go pro. So I don't know where the miscommunication was with other teams, but the Mets managed to draft him and sign him for $2.5 million in the third round, like you mentioned. And then, he, for a guy his age, at that time, Brooklyn was basically reserved for college juniors, college seniors. Matt Allan went and pitched out of the bullpen for Brooklyn in their championship run in the New York Penn League in 2019 as a kid fresh out of high school. So he's an advanced arm. When he was right, we have no idea what the stuff's going to look like when he returns, but when he was right, it was a fastball that would touch 96 or 97 with good life. The breaking ball was his main swing and miss pitch. He was working on his changeup and was optimistic as to where it was going until everything fell apart. Not all because of him. And the 2020 minor league season was canceled due to COVID. And Allan was at the alternate site. If you remember that, the alternate site in Brooklyn where they just, jammed some guys in case of the need due to like COVID absences. And they also gave some prospects a shot there. So he pitched there, worked with guys like Dellin Betances and other former big league arms on some of his stuff. And then 2021 happens, needs Tommy John surgery, misses all of the season. Get ready for 2022 for Allan to come back. He needs ulnar nerve transposition surgery, which we've seen Steven Matz have. We've seen Jacob deGrom have. It can be kind of a follow-up surgery of sorts to Tommy John. But talking to people with the Mets, they do expect Allan to be ready for spring training. What that means for this year, I think he's the wild card of all wild cards in this system. Does he come back and look right? Maybe he does. And if that's the case, then you're looking at the whole perception of the pitching in this system drastically changes, because Allan was a guy that, like I said, talking about a top 15 type of talent in the draft, but now we're 3 years removed from him pitching at all. He has 10 1/3 professional innings in his whole career. So there'll obviously be a strict innings cap, but from all that I understand, they expect him to be ready to pitch in spring training. And then, we'll see how kind of slow they take him throughout the year.
Yeah, the ultimate wild card for a system that does not have that high profile arm, the guy that everybody talks about and is waiting to make that debut. What Allan does or doesn't do in 2023 has gigantic ramifications on the Mets farm system just from the pitching side. There's a lot of hitters we're still going to go through on this list, but you're absolutely nailed it, Joe, where we don't know, because coming back from injuries and not having a track record in minor league ball really makes a guy really hard to predict. But when you just go by raw tools and stuff and who he was expected to be as a high school prospect, there's also still a lot to be excited about with Matt Allan. All right, let's look at the other Mets first round pick from this most recent draft. They took Parada, and then they took Jett Williams, who was the Joe DeMayo guy of this draft. You were higher on Jett in a sense of every MLB mock I was reading up until that draft. I know you were highest with rankings, and it really felt like every time I read anything about Jett Williams, whether it was someone like you that was really high on him or somebody that liked him but would feed back the relay of the MLB's thoughts, was, well, he's awesome, but he's a smaller guy. And it was like everything was great defensively. He can run, he can hit, but he's a smaller guy. And I'm just like, at what point is the guy just a really, really good baseball player? So give me the lowdown on what we can expect from Jett Williams.
Yeah, Jett the Met was my favorite. He was my favorite prospect in the draft. He wasn't obviously at the top of my rankings, like you said, but I saw him to be right in range where the Mets picked, where a lot of the public had him, more in the maybe late teens, early 20s. And a lot of that was, like you said, due to size. And, I talked to one scout, not with the Mets, that saw him at the area code games, which is one of the big showcases. And they said, this guy just doesn't swing and miss. Who cares how tall he is? What's the matter? He doesn't swing and miss. He hits the ball. this is plus bat the ball skills. The only high school player in the draft that I think had better bat the ball skills was Termarr Johnson, who ended up with the Pirates, top 5, top 6, wherever they picked. But he's kind of a plus athlete. He's a guy that I think will be able to play second or center field if you want. The size, the only thing that I guess where it does play into a degree is on the power side. I don't think he's ever going to be, a huge home run bopper, but he's strong. He's a stocky kid. Like he's built 5'8". He's built at like 180, 185 pounds, and he's built. So there is some thump in his bat, but it's going to be largely doubles, and you'll see triples because it's plus speed, it's plus effort. He's the kind of guy that I think Mets fans are going to absolutely fall in love with watching him play. Talking to one Mets person that saw him a bunch this year, you didn't leave a Jett Williams game and his jersey wasn't dirty. So he's an all-out effort guy, and he's the type of prospect that I think may not stick out with like the plus tools, and he's not gonna be that sexy prospect, but I think he's just a baseball rat that's gonna be successful, and he's someone that I wouldn't personally bet against.
Yeah, that sounds like a floor player for the Mets, and something that's really, really important to a farm system. You're not everybody that comes up is going to be an all-star, but and I'm not saying Jett Williams can't, I want to make that very clear, but do you feel good about a floor of, hey, he's going to play in the big leagues for a long time, he's going to give you good defense, he can run the bases, and he puts the ball in play? Not every prospect needs to be an all or nothing power hitter or a guy throwing 102 miles an hour. I mean, you need guys that can come up and be serviceable players in your lineup with some defensive versatility. So I know us on the show, we really, really liked the pick of Jett Williams where they took him. All right, the player that we've already seen, but it was short-lived in the major league level, and that's Brett Baty, who came up with a bang. He hits the home run down in Atlanta. I think there was some moments for Baty that we expected, Joe, where he never looked entirely comfortable at third, but also didn't look like a disaster at third. It was more of just, okay, we know this guy is not going to be a Gold Glove third baseman. Can we get a comfort level of just consistency at third base? Because the thought with Baty is he's somebody that's going to be able to hit for a lot of power in a sense of not necessarily 30 home runs all the time, but doubles, hard contact. So going into, let's make this a little more cut and dry, Joe. Let's say we're going into spring training. Carlos Correa is the Mets third baseman for the foreseeable future. What is the Mets plan for Brett Baty down in Port St. Lucie?
The plan for Brett Baty is to get used to a bigger glove. So he has some experience in left field. Back when him and Mark Vientos were in the same lineup in Double-A, they were almost for a little bit there alternating days because they were trying to figure out who was the third baseman of the future and who might be more of an outfielder long term. And Baty was much more comfortable in the outfield than Vientos was. So I think the plan for the Mets right now is full steam ahead, Brett Baty as an outfielder, assuming Carlos Correa, signs and ends up with the Mets. I think Baty's a left fielder. I think he's got the arm for it. I mean, this is a kid that he pitched in high school and he was up to 93, 94 on the gun off the mound. So there is enough arm, I think, to handle left field. And he's not a plus athlete, but he's not really a lumbering guy either. So I think he'll profile okay in left. I don't think, like you said, he's probably not winning a Gold Glove wherever you play him, but I don't think you're not looking at Daniel Murphy. You're not looking at Lucas Duda in left field. Like, I think he'll be able to handle the spot. And like you said, the bat is there. It's bat to ball skills. It's high on base skill. Like, Baty's a guy that I can envision being, a 360, 370 on base guy at the next level with 20 to 25 home runs. So an exciting prospect that's just going to get his, position changed if Correa is here. That's just the reality. And he's so close to big league ready that you're making that change now with the idea of, maybe he's an injury replacement during the year. If not, we're absolute, not even worst case, because I mean, everyone was healthy and good, that, in 2024, you're looking as your opening day left fielder. Whereas, talk about Jett Williams, while he's in the real beginning stages of his career, you have no problem. Just let him keep playing shortstop. That's where he's comfortable. let him play there while he figures out minor league life and hitting at the professional level. And then once you get to the upper levels, that's when you work on the transition because, obviously Lindor is going to be here for a long time. So, yeah, the left side of the infield could be really filled up. And, these prospects are going to find new defensive homes or, eventually at some point, some prospects will get traded. I don't think there's any reason to rush anyone out the door. But once that time comes, I think they'll make their assessment on who really fits.
And in the short term, Joe, maybe something that we've overlooked is, what if it doesn't work out for Daniel Vogelbach this year, right? Vogelbach was a good acquisition for the Mets last year. Traditionally, Vogelbach is a guy that has had success against right-handed pitching, and the Mets do not expand his role beyond that, which is what a smart baseball team would do. Vogelbach can't hit left-handed pitching. Then you go into the whole question of the substituting when the lefty comes in and he can't play the field. And let's just say it doesn't work out or the Mets want a different look. Maybe Baty does get some at-bats in that situation just to make sure that if he's with the big league club, that he's constantly getting time. And if he's not, then he'll have to play down in Syracuse. So a really fascinating year ahead for Brett Baty. The next player in Ronny Mauricio, there might not be a higher profile player in the Mets system that is more blocked at the moment than a guy like Ronny Mauricio, where he started out as a shortstop. He went from about 160 pounds to looks like 220 right now. He's very, very tall. The thought could have been second base. We know Jeff McNeil's there. We know third base is taken. There's a lot of conversations about what Mauricio's future and a lot of doubt if it's even with the Mets. Well, Joe, no player in the Mets farm system, maybe no player in the Mets organization has had a more successful fall winter playing baseball than Ronny Mauricio, who was correct me if I'm wrong, Winter League MVP, tearing the cover off the ball down there. We know Mauricio's always had power. The big thing with him was always going to be pitch selection, making contact, reducing strikeouts, getting on base. Joe, has the pendulum started to swing back the other way after this winter for Mauricio, where there's something to be really excited about again? He's still a really young guy.
I think it is to a degree. Obviously, performing in the Winter League is way better than the alternative of not doing so. But it's not, the highest level of competition either. But either way, he performed, and there's plenty of other people down there that did not. He won the MVP of the league, like you mentioned. I have openly been the low guy on Ronny Mauricio for a couple years now due to the need to work on his pitch recognition skills. I didn't like the fact that he basically doesn't walk. He drew a few walks down in the Dominican, which was great to see. But I still don't think that's, largely going to be a big part of his game as we project forward. But otherwise, the power, like you said, he's grown into his body. He's always had the raw power to, put the ball in the air. But he was a small guy. He was 160 pounds. He was 180 pounds, got to 190. Now I think he's upwards of 215, 220. He's in that range. So he's a big, strong kid that's really tapping into that above average raw power and bringing it into game action. And we forget he hit over 25 home runs, I believe, this year for Double-A Binghamton. So he obviously performed at that level. And I really have thought about it. And, maybe his offensive profile is like a Javi Baez light. I think I said this on this show maybe a month ago or so. But that's okay. Not every guy in your lineup is going to get on base at a 360 clip, a 350 clip. If he provides enough power and puts the ball in play, I think, you could survive with a different type of profile in a guy that, what's his position now? That's the big question that you mentioned off the top. Shortstop's taken. I think he's too big for second base. I've never seen a 6'3", 6'4", 220-pound second baseman. So I don't know if that fits. He would have transitioned fine at third, which he actually played a good amount of down in the Dominican when O'Neal Cruz from the Pirates came in to play on his team. Mauricio obviously was going to move, not Cruz. But I've always thought Ronny Mauricio should try the outfield. So assuming he's with the Mets come spring training, which I don't see any reason why he wouldn't be. I don't think there's going to be a trade opportunity that comes up that warrants giving him up. I would be giving him an outfield glove. Let's see what he could do. Try him in center on the backfields. Try him in left. Try him in right. And, see what the fit is. But, maybe he's a guy that when you think down the road, his fit seems a little less clear, with the Mets, but I also think there's a lot of fans out there that are always trying to rush a prospect out the door. Like once the rumor of Correa signing with the Mets was 2 weeks ago, I got so many tweets like, all right, when are they trading Brett Baty? Relax. Like you can build up a farm system, and guys don't always play the position that they played in the minors at the big league level. I always go back to like Juan Lagares was a shortstop in the minor leagues, ends up a center fielder at the next level. So where Mauricio's fantastic center fielder. So where Mauricio ends up defensively, I think is certainly a question that he has to answer. But he's had a massive winter, and I think in the eyes of some people, maybe the Mauricio stock is trending back upwards.
Our last one on our prospect review list, Dom Hamel, the Mets' third-round pick from the 2021 draft out of Dallas Baptist. A rare young arm in the Mets system that's made plenty of starts now. He had a really, really good year when he got to Brooklyn last year, Joe. So what have you seen from Hamel, and what could his potential timeline be? I'm assuming he's going to get a chance to start the year in Double-A.
Yeah, that's where I would expect he would start the year in Binghamton. But Hamel was a third-round pick, like you mentioned, in 2021. He ended up being, the second pitcher that they signed after Calvin Ziegler and, not signing Kumar Rocker. And Dom Hamel is a spin rate monster, is basically how he's been described to me. His fastball will touch 96, but it'll get upwards of 18 to 19 inches of induced vertical break, which is for kind of like old school baseball terms, like if you say a pitcher's fastball has ride, that's what induced vertical break is. But now there's just a measurement of it. His slider is a big time secondary pitch that the spin rates on it would probably be like top 25 or so in Major League Baseball right now. So he really gets a lot of swing and misses on that. He does need some work on his command and control. There's no question. But talking to someone within the Mets player development, they said, we have to kind of harness him. His stuff almost moves too much. So it's not an inability to throw strikes. It's just the ball's moving so much that he has to learn to corral it. But I think he starts Double-A Binghamton. We saw Tyler McGill start in Double-A Binghamton and kind of surprisingly make the major leagues. I think the Mets are deep enough that they probably don't need to do that this year. Well, hopefully don't need to. They're 10 deep right now. So if you need much more than that, then you're probably looking at quite a different year than we expected. But I would look at him as a 2024 kind of guy that, he looks every bit of a fourth starter. And if the control and command doesn't get to the level that it needs to make him that consistent starter, then, he ends up a bullpen arm in the likes of a Seth Lugo, someone that could go multi-innings. Lugo was known for his induced vertical break on his fastball, the spin rate on his curveball. Like he could profile in that light.
Yeah, with Hamel, gets up to Brooklyn from St. Lucie last year, makes 11 starts, strikes out 12 batters over 9. So, I mean, the stuff is real with the sub-3 ERA. So it's another one where, yeah.
And I should mention he won the Organizational Pitcher of the Year award. I meant to mention that at the top, but then I just going. But yeah, just happened to win the award for the best pitcher in the Mets system this year too.
When, let's be real, I don't want to say he was overlooked because I know you wouldn't overlook a guy, especially taken in the third round, but it didn't feel like there was a ton of hype around Dom Hamel in a sense where he would be where he is today.
Honestly, I was hearing more hype about Mike Vasil, who they took in the 8th round.
Exactly.
Like that was the guy that the Mets were talking about. We think we got a steal here. And that may be the case. He performed well at the Arizona Fall League, and he's going to get the opportunity to probably be in that Double-A rotation with Hamel. But I think he was a little overlooked, and I don't think we should anymore.
All right, a reminder, everybody, check out the full minor league features from Joe at SNY.TV, and a reminder to subscribe to the Mets Pod at Apple Podcasts, Spotify. You can watch on SNY's YouTube or wherever you get your shows. Joe, let's close out this episode with mailbag questions, as we always do. Got a couple good ones here. We'll start off with the fun one, and then we'll get to a little bit more serious one. The fun one is from Steve Miller, old friend of the show. He said, if you can only have one jersey in your closet of a current Met, whose jersey are you picking? Joe, do I really have to ask you this?
Well,
you have a new edition, and I think if you had to narrow it down to one, this is the only edition you would keep.
Oh yeah, for sure. My mom for Christmas got me a black Edwin Diaz jersey. So there's
Well
no
done, Mom.
doubt that Edwin Diaz would be the jersey I'd keep. He is my personal favorite Met. I have Lindor and Alonso as well, but Diaz is my number one. So that's me.
The only current Met I have right now is Alonso. I have a couple throwbacks. I have a black jersey with no name on it. I don't. I mean, by default, it's Alonso for me. But I'm trying to think if I had to add one, who would be. I'm a big fan when it comes to teams of having. I think obscure is not really a nice way to put it, so I don't mean it by that. But not like the typical jersey. Like everybody wears quarterback jerseys, right? It's fun to go with the player that could be a little less. Not like a Diaz jersey, honestly, if you had that, especially like 2 years ago, that would be very random. Even now, I don't see
Oh,
Diaz jerseys anywhere.
2 years ago,
Closer jerseys.
I'd get stuff thrown at me if
Yeah,
I
you'd
wore a
get thrown
Diaz
out of the
jersey
stadium.
2 years ago.
Yeah, you'd get thrown out of the stadium. So no surprise there from us. All right, our last question is from Mickey, who said on Twitter, if the Mets plan on lowering their cap hit in the future, I think Mickey just means their total payroll, because fortunately for Steve Cohen's Mets, there is no salary cap, so you don't have to worry about their salary cap hit. But their payroll in the future, what does that mean regarding deals for McNeil and maybe Alonso, in a sense that they could not happen? Joe, I don't really carry that fear. I've said before, McNeil's a guy that actually wouldn't surprise me because of how late he'll get to free agency, and he's been banged up. As great of a player he is, I don't think there'll be a rush to get an extension done with McNeil that wasn't favorable to the team. I think that if they wanted to tack on a year past his arbitration, they'd be willing to do something like that. But I think it's also a point where he's under team control where they'd let that one ride. Alonso is going to be a different situation. The first base market is not typically that out of hand. Alonso is going to get a nice contract extension. He's a great power hitter. He's obviously one of the heart and soul players to this franchise. And just because the Mets are doing all these external deals, I just think at the end of the day, they will take care of their own when it's time to take care of their own.
And so many of these contracts are expiring in the next 2 to 3 years. So the luxury tax payroll will open up by proxy of Max Scherzer coming off the books, Justin Verlander coming off the books, Mark Canha, Eduardo Escobar. You go up and down this list. When you're thinking about actual, true long-term money, it's Nimmo, it's Lindor, it's possibly Correa. Like Kodai Senga and Edwin Diaz got 5-year deals, but they both have opt-outs after year 3. So it's hypothetically, you don't have those guys for 5 years either. So they have a lot of time to kind of work that out. They'll have flexibility. And we spent a bulk of this show talking about the farm system. That's why that is so important. It's why I've always harped on it. And, I think some Met fans are starting to catch on, but there's still a lot that don't care about it. And that's fine. But having these prospects come up, and I hate to use it in this terminology, but having a Francisco Alvarez make $500,000 behind, or $700,000 is the minimum now, behind the plate is important. Having a Brett Baty make $700,000 in left field is important. When the more of those type of things you have, the more flexibility you have to spend externally, whether that's Ohtani that we're talking about, whether that's Juan Soto, whether that's obviously extending Pete or McNeil. At the end of the day, Steve Cohen has the money. There's no salary cap. If he wants to keep both McNeil and Alonso, he will. And, I don't envision that being something they cannot pull off.
Exactly. And I understand why a lot of Mets fans like Mickey have had this, not fear, but they've asked the question. They're like, we're doing all these deals. Are they going to not take care of their own, or are they going to run into problems? And that the fortunate side of a league with no cap is that if you want to keep a guy, you just have to have the money, and the Mets have the money. On the prospect side of things, Joe, but you look at the smaller things, like when Quintana's up in 2 years, can Matt Allan or Dom Hamel, who we talked about on the show today, can they slide in? I mean, that right there is $13 million you're clearing essentially in that role. So it's those little things that add up, and you could blink and go, oh, we transitioned these 3 spots on the roster that were costing us 50 to 60 million, and now they might be costing us under 3 million. So that's where the Mets need to get. They could always do these high profile deals, but the supplemental deals that do get you over that Steve Cohen tax, the Mets are trying to find their way there. And I think their timeline is actually pretty solid for it.
Yeah, and the more of these guys you have, the more you can play in these markets, right? Like everyone wants the Mets to be involved every year on the big fish, and obviously, like you said, the secondary pieces. But if you just don't care about the farm system, you don't develop prospects, you don't give them opportunity, which is one thing that is like a potential criticism of the Mets is they haven't been willing to give a chance to their prospects. There's been a lot of them trade over the last handful of years, and you see Atlanta do it. Michael Harris comes up from Double-A. Vaughn Grissom comes up from Double-A. They're a contending team and they throw these guys in the lineup. So Strider, another example. So like you can't be afraid. Like you have to be willing to throw these guys in the lineup and realize there's going to be some bumps in the road. It comes with the territory, but I think they're heading in the right direction. I think they have the right vision. And now what's going to be real important is sticking to it. Because it's easy to say you have a vision, but then it's also just as easy to deter away from it when you get excited about certain things in trade, etc. So we'll see if they're able to stick with it, but their plan and their process that they are seemingly on right now, I think is the exact right way to get to the point of not just winning, but winning continuously.
Absolutely. It's something that we've really banged the table for since Cohen took over the team. So with that being said, we will be back next week. Joe, you think next time we record a show, Correa officially a Met?
I hope so. I kind of don't want to talk about it anymore. I just want to talk about him being on the team. And Ken Rosenthal's report yesterday with The Athletic was he kind of thought it would happen this week. So everyone's back from the new year and the holiday. So hunker down, Scott Boras, hunker down, Mets lawyers, and get a deal done.
An hour after the show is posted is when it'll happen. So you're welcome, everybody. Yeah, that's typically how it goes here at the Mets Pod. So we are looking forward to talking to you all next week about constructing a lineup with Carlos Correa in it, mapping out the rotation and the bullpen roles, real baseball aspects as the offseason is not behind us, but the heavy lifting hopefully will be over. So one more reminder, subscribe to the Mets Pod, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, SNY's YouTube, or wherever you get your shows. Thanks so much, everybody. Catch you next week.